I'm Mohsen Rezazadeh. Currently, I'm an assistant professor at the University of Isfahan. Instructional Phonetics and Phonology. This is session 10, English Words and Sentences, Part 1. In the previous session, we discussed vowel quality. We said that when you move from one vowel to another vowel, you are changing the auditory quality of the vowel. We also talked about diphthongs. We said that diphthong involves a change in quality within one vowel, or it can be described as a movement from one vowel to another vowel. Afterwards, we talked about rhotic vowels. We said that some languages or some accents of English permit some form of re after a vowel. They are called rhotic. Some other accents are non-rhotic. The pronunciation of the vowel for example, in sir, is r-colored. This is called rhoticization. We also talked about tense and lax vowels, and at the end we talked about English vowel allophones. In that section I provided 6 rules about vowels, which was a kind of summary about English vowels. In previous sessions, we considered lists of words that illustrated the contrast between consonants and the contrast between vowels. This is a good way of starting to look at the gestures that make up the words of English. But speech is not really composed of a series of distinct gestures, and we don't usually speak using isolated words. If you remember, we said that we work on citation form of speech. That is the form of a word when you say it by itself. There is at least one stressed syllable and no reduced vowel. This is what we did in previous sessions. But now we must look at how pronunciations of individual words compare with what happens in more normal connected speech. So what is connected speech? Words in a sentence in which there is several stressed syllables and reduced vowels. So in connected speech, words are reduced. In citation form, words occur when you say it by itself, and at least one syllable is fully stressed, and there is no reduction. Look at this example. The speaker was being interviewed, and the topic of life choices came up. He was talking about choosing between a life of crime or a life in a religious discipline. And he said, or I was going to go in the opposite direction, and I went in the opposite direction. Before reading on, listen to this utterance. I will play it for you. Can you hear any differences in the word opposite between the first time he says it and the second? Now, listen carefully.
Done them, I would have known they were wrong. Or I was going to the opposite direction, and I went the opposite direction. I got plugged in with some Christian.
As you see, they both seem to be perfectly acceptable American pronunciations of the word, but the second opposite is phonetically reduced. Now, look at the spectrogram for this utterance. In fact, this is our first spectrogram of speech, so you shouldn't expect to get much out of it at first. But even with only a little explanation of how to read spectrogram, you should be able to tell that the word opposite was said in two different ways in this utterance. As you can see, there are arrows under the portions of the spectrogram that correspond to vowel sounds. The first opposite has three arrows corresponding to the three vowels that we expect in the citation form of the word, while in the second production we can only identify two vowel segments. So as you can see, the first opposite has three vowels, the second opposite has two vowels. In fact, the second opposite is phonetically reduced. Now, try to answer this question. What is the key difference between citation speech and connected speech? In fact, the key difference between citation speech and connected speech is the variable degree of emphasis placed on words in connected speech. The degree of emphasis is probably related to the amount of information that a word conveys in a particular utterance in conversation. For example, repetitions such as the second opposite in the previous slide are are always reduced compared to the first mention of the word. But here we will focus on the phonetics of reduction, not its semantics. So the answer to this question is degree of emphasis. So degree of emphasis is related to amount of information that a word conveys. In the first opposite, maybe the amount of information is more. In the second opposite, the amount of information is less. Maybe this is the reason, which is the degree of emphasis that makes the difference between citation speech and connected speech. The citation and connected speech difference is particularly noticeable for one class of words. Closed class words such as grammatical words, for example, determiners, a, and, the, conjunctions like and, or, and prepositions like of, in, with. In fact, the grammatical words are very rarely emphasized in connected speech, and thus their normal pronunciation in connected speech is quite different from their citation speech forms. The other one is one-class words. For example, content words like names of things, book, blackboard, window, for example, desk. These are examples of open class words. Since closed class words are rarely emphasized in connected speech, their citation and connected speech pronunciations are very different. But for open class words, the difference between connected speech and citation speech pronunciations are not that much. Sometimes closed class words show a strong form. Look at this example. He wanted pie and ice cream, not pie or ice cream. When the words are stressed or emphasized, they show strong or full form. Here the emphasis is on and, not or. So we pronounce it fully. We say he wanted pie and ice cream, means both of them, not pie or ice cream, not one of them. But when the words are unstressed, they show weak or reduced form. Look at this table. Several of the words in this table have more than one weak form. Sometimes, as in the case of, for example, and, or for can, you can see that we have more than one weak form. There are no clear rules as to when one as opposed to another of these forms is likely to occur. After a word ending with an alveolar consonant, most speakers of English have a tendency to drop the vowel and say, for example, and in phrases such as cat and dog or his and hers. But this is far from invariable. If you look at the other examples, for example, a, like strong form is a, like a cup, a word, a. When you want to emphasize a, you pronounce it as a. But the weak form is a, like a book, like, for example, a desk, like a banana. But when you want to emphasize that one, you should say a book, a banana, or and, for example, you and me, instead of you and me, or you and me. As, for example, as good as, or at home, can, for example, I can go. When you want to emphasize the probability that you can go, you say I can go. This is the full form. I can go. This is the reduced form. For some words, there are rules that are nearly always applicable. One is the alternation between a before a consonant and an before a vowel. And this is recognized even in the spelling. Everybody knows this. For example, we say a book, but we say an apple. Similar alternations occur with the words the and to. In fact, the and to before consonants and the and to before vowels. Look at this example to clarify the point. Listen to my pronunciation. The man and the old man went to Britain and to America. Listen again. The man and the old man went to Britain and to America. So, if you pay attention, the two examples of the will often be pronounced differently. One is the man, the other one is the old man, the old woman. The man, the old. The man I pronounce it as the because me in man is a consonant, but I pronounce the second the as the because o in old man is a vowel. Same rule applies for to Britain and to America. So the two examples of the will often be pronounced differently. Of course, it should be noted that there is a growing tendency for younger American English speakers to use the form the in all circumstances, even before a vowel. Some rules are also applicable for homonyms, those words that have same spelling but different meaning. In fact, some of the words are confusing in that the same spelling represents two words with different meanings. One of them is that. As demonstrative pronoun, like for example, that boy. This is the strong form. When we say that boy, this is demonstrative pronoun. But sometimes that is a conjunction, and we pronounce it with a in a weak form. For example, he said that it did. He said that it did. He said that it did. That. He said that. He said that he's a good student. He said that he will come. That. So the first one is that as demonstrative pronoun, strong form. The second one is that as a conjunction. We use the weak form. So the conjunction is much more likely to have a weak form. The demonstrative that is always pronounced as that. Similarly, this is true for has, when it is auxiliary and when it is main verb. When it is auxiliary, we pronounce it as has or is or z. And when it is main verb, we pronounce it as has. Look at this example. Like, for example, the first one, she's gone or she's gone. The second one is she has nice eyes. In the second example, has is the main verb, but in the first example, has is an auxiliary. Sometimes we have contraction, like she's gone, she's gone. If we have the full form, we say she's gone, she has gone. For the second one, we say she has nice eyes. As you already know, sounds are often affected by adjacent sounds. For example, the ne in 10th is articulated on the teeth because of the following dental fricative th. In fact, similar effects commonly occur across word boundaries. So that in phrases such as in the, or for example on the ne is realized as a dental ne because of the following the. So when we pronounce it, it would be something like this: in the, or on the. Here, this ne is realized as a dental ne. When one sound is changed into another because of the influence of a neighboring sound, we have assimilation. The assimilation may be complete if the nasal becomes absolutely dental, or the assimilation may be partial if it is somewhere between dental and alveolar. Causes of assimilation: anticipatory co-articulation on next sound. As you know, anticipatory co-articulation is by far the most common cause of assimilations in English. In this process, the gesture for one sound is affected by anticipating the gesture for the next sound. For example, in 10th, ne is dental because of the effect of the. But there are also perseverative assimilations in which the gesture for one sound perseveres into the gesture for the next sound. The pronunciation of the phrase, for example, it is, becomes it's. This is a result of perseveration of the voicelessness of te. There is, of course, nothing lazy about using weak forms and assimilations. And the fact is that only people with artificial notions about what constitutes so-called good speech could use adjectives such as these to label this kind of speech we've been describing. Rather than being labeled lazy, it could be described as being more efficient in that it conveys the same meaning with less effort. Weak forms and assimilations are common in speech of every sort of speaker in both Britain and America. Foreigners who make insufficient use of them sound, in fact, stilt. Stress. Stress is most easily identified in citation forms. In conversational speech, words can be unemphasized, and when this happens, some of the properties of stressed syllables may not be realized. In citation forms, a stressed syllable is usually produced by pushing more air out of the lungs in one syllable relative to others. A stressed syllable, thus, has greater respiratory energy than neighboring unstressed syllables. It may also have an increase in laryngeal activity. Stress can always be defined in terms of something a speaker does in one part of an utterance relative to another. In fact, it is difficult to define stress from a listener's point of view. A stressed syllable is often, but not always, louder than an unstressed syllable. In declarative utterances, it is usually, but again, not always, on a higher pitch. The most reliable thing for a listener to detect is that a stressed syllable frequently has a longer vowel than it would have if it were unstressed. But this does not mean that all long vowels are necessarily stressed. So a stressed syllable can be defined as having these louder, in fact being louder, having a higher pitch, and having a longer vowel. Stress has several different functions in English. Number one, to give special emphasis to a word or to contrast one word with another. So, in the first place, it can be used in sentences to give special emphasis to a word or to contrast one word with another. As we have seen, even a word such as and can be given a contrastive stress. The contrast can be implicit rather than explicit. For example, if someone else says, or if you even thought that someone else might possibly say, for example, John or Mary should go. Now, you might, without any prior context actually spoken, say, I think John and Mary should go. So you see the difference in stress pattern. Listen again. John or Mary should go. I think John and Mary should go. This is to give a special emphasis. Another major function of stress in English is to indicate the syntactic category of words. In fact, there are many noun-verb oppositions such as an insult to insult, or for example, an overflow to overflow, an increase to increase. These are all noun-verb oppositions. In these three pairs of words, the noun has the stress on the first syllable, and the verb has it on the last. The placement of the stress indicates the syntactic category of the word. Of course, there are nouns with second syllable stress, like, for example, guitar or piano, and verbs with first syllable stress, like, for example, tremble or flutter So stress placement is not determined by syntactic category, but is simply a cue in certain noun-verb pairs as to the identity of the word. Therefore, the second function of stress in English can be to indicate the syntactic category of pair of noun-verb oppositions. Stress also has a syntactic function in distinguishing between a compound noun and an adjective plus a noun. Look at this example. A hot dog, which is a sandwich, versus a hot dog, which means an overheated animal. Another example. A greenhouse, which is a building used for growing plants, versus a greenhouse, means a house with green color. So compound nouns have a single stress on the first element, as you can see. For example, hot dog or greenhouse. And the adjective plus noun phrases have a stress on both elements. For example, a hot dog or a green house. The fourth function of stress in English is to distinguish between words with the same syntactic function. There are very few examples of lexical items such as differ and defer that have the same syntactic function. They are both verbs, but different stress patterns. If you pay attention, you see that both of these are verbs, but they have different stress patterns. One of them is defer, which is related to being different, and the other one is defer, which means to delay. Another example is below and below, below and below. This is another pair of words which illustrates that again, differences in stress are not always differences between nouns and verbs. In fact, here below, the stress on the first part is a moving cloth or mass of something such as a smoke or cloth, but below means something which is at the bottom or below something else. So this is again another function of a stress that can help to distinguish between words with the same part of speech. For example, both of them can be verbs, both of them can be nouns, and etc. Many other variations in stress can be associated with the grammatical structure of the words. This table exemplifies the kinds of alternations that can occur. All the words in the first column have the main stress on the first syllable. All of the words in the second column have the main stress on the second syllable, and all of the words in the third column have the main stress on the third syllable. If you pay attention, look at the first column. Diplomat, photograph, monotone. When the noun-forming suffix y occurs, the stress in these words shifts to the second syllable. Look at this column. Diplomacy. Here, the noun-forming suffix y occurs at the end of the word. Diplomacy, photography, monotony. So here, the stress in these words shifts to the second syllable. But as you can see in the third column, the adjectival suffix ick, IC, this is an adjectival suffix. Ick moves the stress to the syllable immediately preceding it, preceding IC or ick, which in these words is the third syllable. Diplomatic, photographic, monotonic. So as you see here, the adjectival suffix ick moves the stress to the syllable immediately before it. If you make, in fact, a sufficiently complex set of rules, it is somehow possible to predict the location of a stress in majority of English words. For example, we can say that the words that include noun forming suffix y at the end have stress on the first syllable. This is something which is possible, and we can use this rule to predict the location of stress for these kinds of words. We began this session with words in speech, citation form, and connected speech. Next, we talked about words in connected speech. I showed you a spectrogram of a connected speech, and then I asked you to see the difference between the two opposites in that spectrogram. That was an example of a connected speech. Next, we talked about some rules in relation to connected speech. For example, when you can use the and when you can use the. For example, the man and the old man. Afterwards, I talked about causes of assimilation, which were, for example, anticipatory co-articulation and perseverate assimilation. Anticipatory co-articulation is on the next sound, perseverative assimilation is on the previous sound. And finally, I talked about stress, and I explained 4 main functions of stress in English. And this is the end of session 10. Good luck, everybody.